Hello and welcome to Down to Disness, a monthly series where I pick a Disney animated movie and talk about its history and its impact on pop culture. This month's movie is 2010's Tangled, Disney's first ever CGI princess movie. Tangled is of course based off of the grim fairy tale Rapunzel, but the original story differs greatly from the movie we know today. In the original story, Rapunzel is not a princess but is born to a peasant couple, and while her mother is pregnant with her, she has a craving for a radish type of vegetable. The vegetable changes in different versions of the story. To fulfill his wife's pregnancy cravings, her father goes into a neighbor's garden and steals some vegetables for his wife, but he is caught, and in exchange for the vegetables, he has to give up the rights to his firstborn child. All these stories end up with people giving up their firstborn child. Blah blah blah, they give her the baby, she locks her in a tower, and then a visiting prince comes to see Rapunzel frequently and actually gets her pregnant. When this Mother Gothel type character finds out that she's pregnant, she cuts her hair and banishes her to the forest where she gives birth. The prince comes back to visit Rapunzel, but instead finds Mother Gothel. Her name isn't Mother Gothel in this story. He falls into a bunch of thorns and actually becomes blinded. He wanders aimlessly into the forest, blind and bleeding out of his eye sockets, until he's reunited with Rapunzel, whose tears actually restore his sight, and they live happily ever after. So yeah. The story of Rapunzel was actually something that Walt was interested in making as early as the 1940s. After they made Snow White, the Disney studios were interested in adapting a lot of different fairy tales, and Rapunzel was one that Walt was interested in working with, but it obviously didn't happen until the 2000s. I actually think it's wonderful that it took them this long to make the story of Rapunzel into an animated movie, because the use of CGI and a lot of things that were put into this movie wouldn't have been possible back in Walt's day. The lantern scene alone had 45,000 lanterns in it. That wouldn't have been possible in the 1940s, and it is one of the most iconic Disney scenes in recent history. Another thing they were able to do for Tangled was create the biggest crowd scene in a Walt Disney animated feature film. When Rapunzel goes to the Kingdom of Corona with Flynn for the first time, there are more individual animated people in that scene than ever before. There are over 3,000 people in this scene. The previous record holder was Hunchback of Notre Dame, and part of me thinks Coco might take the cake now, but as far as Walt Disney animated features go, Tangled holds the title. Glenn Keane was a key animator on Tangled, and he was actually almost the director of the movie. It was so important to him that although this movie was going to be CGI, that it still feel like a hand-drawn animated film. He hosted a seminar for Disney animators called The Best of Both Worlds, where he taught them how to bring a warm hand-drawn feel to computer-generated images. So much of what they wanted to do with Tangled wasn't actually possible with computer graphics yet, that Walt Disney Feature Animation had to literally invent techniques for this movie that didn't exist before. Animating Rapunzel's hair was actually one of the biggest challenges and the biggest triumphs of the movie. Kelly Ward was one of the software engineers behind animating Rapunzel's hair, and she actually got her computer science PhD in hair and the physics of hair. She's basically a hair doctor. The actual length of Rapunzel's hair is 70 feet, because that is how tall her tower is, obviously. But if this was realistic hair, it would weigh like 80 pounds. So the challenge was really animating hair that was believably that long, but not actually that heavy, because if it was that heavy, Rapunzel wouldn't have been able to do any of the things that she did in this movie. Another cool fact about Glenn Keane's involvement in this project is that his daughter Claire Keane actually did all of the art that Rapunzel draws on the walls of her tower. And if you know anything about Glenn Keane, you know that he often draws inspiration from his family in his art, and Tangled is no exception, because Rapunzel is actually based a lot on Claire Keane. Tangled gets the milestone of being Disney's 50th animated feature film, but it also started a trend that you guys may have noticed of naming Disney movies with kind of adjective titles. The movie was going to be called Rapunzel, but then they decided to call it Tangled. This continued with movies like Brave and Frozen, and the original reason why they didn't call it Rapunzel is because they wanted to make the movie more appealing to all children and maybe not only girls. But it was also probably a good idea because from the start, the directors knew that they wanted this to kind of be as much Flynn Rider's story as it was Rapunzel's. Flynn Rider went through such a process in the development of this film. The animators struggled with the look of Flynn Rider because he is such a complex character in that that he's likable and unlikable often at the same time. They couldn't have him look too rugged and rough, but they also couldn't have him look too much like a pretty boy. They said that they really needed there to be a sensitivity to his eyes, and they also wanted him to be attractive. The team behind Tangled famously had a hot man meeting where all of the women in the company came to look at different sketches of Flynn Rider to decide which one would be the most attractive. And it narrowed down to the design that we have today in the movie. But it wasn't just his look that took a long time for them to decide. It was actually his character itself that they went back and forth on for a long time. In one version, Flynn was going to be a wayward prince who kind of fell into a bad crowd of bandits. And in another version, he was kind of like the leader of the bandits, much like a Robin Hood type character, and the bandits later became the ruffians that we see in The Snuggly Duckling. And in a version that is kind of close to what we have today, he was going to be a farmer named Bastian, who was an orphan that kind of fell into thievery even though he really hated being a thief. Interestingly enough, Zachary Levi originally auditioned for the role of Flynn Rider with a British accent, and he was hired to do it in a British accent, but then they eventually decided to have him do his regular American accent. Tangled actually has a lot of really cool deleted scenes that you can watch in full online if you have the time. One is an alternate version of the Snuggly Duckling scene in a pub that was actually originally called the Jaunty Moose. It's somewhat similar to the I Have a Dream sequence that we see in the movie today, but it actually starts out with Rapunzel making fun of the different ruffians and then kind of learning that she was wrong to judge them based on their appearances. There was also a deleted scene of Flynn and Rapunzel traveling to the kingdom in a horse-drawn carriage with a fortune-telling monkey. This scene is really cool because a fortune-telling monkey is cool, but it was cut because it doesn't really add anything to the story. In it, the monkey is just sensing that there is something within Rapunzel that is magical and different, but we kind of already knew that, so it didn't need to be in the movie. But what's funny is that there is a animation sketch of the fortune-telling monkey in the credits of the movie that we have today. The coolest deleted thing, in my opinion, is that this movie was originally going to have the classic Disney storybook intro. Instead of having Flynn tell the story of how he died and narrate the beginning intro of the movie, it was going to be told in storybook page form. And what's sad about it is that there are actually a lot of really cool animations of these characters in storybook form, particularly Mother Gothel. What's cool about Mother Gothel is that they took a lot of steps to ensure that she seemed drastically different from Rapunzel. This goes all the way down to the outfit that she wears, which is historically, technically 400 years older than the outfit we see Rapunzel in, which just goes to exemplify how much older she is than everybody else around her. Additionally, anytime you see Mother Gothel express affection for Rapunzel, it is primarily directed at her hair and not at her as a person. And just a little fun fact for you, while many people consider Mother Gothel's death as a classic Disney fall to their death scene, she doesn't actually die from the fall. She actually dies from old age because she turns to dust before she even hits the ground. Did you know? The last character that is extremely important to Rapunzel's story is her trusty sidekick Pascal the Chameleon, who is actually based directly after Disney employee Kelly Lewis's chameleon that she got during production of this film, who was also named Pascal. One of the most famous Disney composers of all time, our fave Alan Menken, did the music for Tangled, and I feel like it's one of his strongest movies. He said that he based a lot of the songs in Tangled on 60s rock, and the film got a nomination for Best Song with I See the Light, although it did not end up winning. The movie was also not nominated for Best Animated Picture, which today is actually considered a huge snub considering How to Train Your Dragon and Toy Story 3 were nominated that year, along with a foreign film that a lot of people didn't even know about called The Illusionist. It's kind of hard to believe that a Disney princess animated film was not nominated for Best Animated Picture that year, especially one as strong as Tangled. But despite not being nominated for Best Animated Picture, Tangled is a huge milestone for Disney animation. It was, as I said, the first CGI princess film, the first CGI musical, Disney's 50th animated film, first Disney princess film to be rated PG instead of just G, and it moved things forward so drastically because to do a lot of the effects in this film, they had to create entirely new graphic technology, and it paid off, man. It's such a good movie. I think Tangled is such a drastically strong movie compared to a lot of the movies that came out around the same time as it. It has such a beautifully crafted character arc for like every character in the movie. It is so beautifully animated. I feel like when it came out, it was an instant classic, and it's why it is still as popular today as it was 8 years ago. It's honestly probably the best movie, in my opinion, in the last 15 years of Disney animation. Let me know what you love about Tangled in the comment section below. I hope those of you who have been requesting Tangled for a long time are pleased with my episode. Let me know in the comments also which movie you'd like to see me do next month on Down to Disness, and until then, have a magical day. Bye!